Okay, welcome everybody. So, one of the perks of being a speaker here is that you actually get invited to a speakers dinner, and that was last night. And one of the other speakers, she asked me what my talk will be about, and I said it's about mindfulness. And she said, "Oh, that's interesting," and then kind of paused and kind of said, "But how is mindfulness going to help software developers?" And I was like thinking, great, that's exactly what I want to answer with my talk today. So I hope that you get, after this talk, a much clearer understanding how mindfulness can help you in your work. But I also want to look at some things why I think that actually mindfulness is actually something maybe especially useful for people like us, for software developers. And even almost really, really good fit. And I'm going to explain that a little bit later. So at the end of the talk, I hope you can decide that, or you can decide if you want to spend more time exploring mindfulness or not. So that's the idea of the talk. So back to last night, before I answer the question, I actually asked a question back, and that was, well, if you hear the word mindfulness or meditation, what is it that actually comes up? What's kind of the first association, the first image, the first word that comes up if you hear those words? And I want to ask you that. So throw in some words. What comes up if you hear the word mindfulness, meditation, stuff like that? Yoga. Okay. Yeah. Quieting the chit-chat in your mind. Lovely. Again? Breathing. Yeah, okay. What else? Presence. Intention. Oh, yeah, very good. Okay, great. So let's kind of deconstruct that and look a little bit at all of that. So I actually want to define mindfulness quite clearly, because I think the word is basically totally overused in the last few years. Okay, so what's my definition of mindfulness? My definition of mindfulness is that it's actually a way to develop useful mental skills. And that means that it's not just an intention, it's also that, but it's also training. Yeah? So for example, if I say I want to be a great coder, I can set that intention, but just saying that doesn't get me there. I actually have to do it. I have to code. I have to practice. I have to train. And that's the same with mindfulness. It's a training program. And it's a systematic training program. Again, another example. Imagine I'm going to the gym for the first time, and I get welcomed by a trainer, and maybe she says, she talks to me, what are your goals, Markus, and we do some exercises, and then she designs a training plan for me. And that training plan isn't just a random collection of exercises, but there's a system behind it, there's a logic behind it. And even some of that training plan is probably based on science. And that's the same thing that is happening in the mindfulness world. That people more and more come up with kind of structures, with systems of how to train this and how to learn mindfulness, based on science. So I'm not going to go into a lot of the scientific background of mindfulness in this talk. All I want to say now is that mindfulness is actually a very, very valid research subject. So if you are at a university, if you're a neuroscientist, for example, and you say, well, I want to, explore the connection between mindfulness and mental health, people usually say, yeah, go for it, get funding and stuff like that. It's not like, you're going to do what? Are you crazy? This is a scientific organization. This was maybe 50 years ago, but now this is like a totally normal, valid research subject. So, like I said, it's a way to develop mental skills. And then, of course, the question is, what kind of mental skills are those? And there are actually different models that look at different kind of ways of defining these skills. And I like to use this one. This is one where we talk about 3 kinds of skills: concentration, clarity, and equanimity. And I'm just going to give you some examples for those. So concentration is actually the capacity to stay with what is important for you in this moment right now. That's kind of what you expected with the word. Again, a little story about that. Imagine you're sitting at your computer, starting in the morning or whenever you start, and kind of, getting into your task, and it's a complicated, a difficult programming problem, and you kind of start and get into it, and then something, I would say, in many organizations, something almost magical happens. And that magical thing is that nobody disturbs you, right? So no calls, no meetings, nobody comes to your desk. You're just being able to focus on that problem. And then 2 hours later, you kind of look up from your screen, and because whatever is lunch break, you need to go to the bathroom, and you think, wow, those 2 hours were really good. Those were actually really amazing. Those were really, really productive, well-spent hours. So that's a state of high concentration, what is often also called a state of flow. And actually, software developers can quite easily get into these states if they don't have a lot of interruptions. So there is actually quite some research around flow and interruptions and how to get into flow and stuff like that. And some of this research is really interesting. They looked at software developers, and they kind of looked at how often do they get interrupted and things like that. And one of the things they noticed while doing this research is that half of the interruptions that happened didn't come from the outside. So it was not the meeting that was occurring. It was not the person who was kind of calling you or stepping at your desk and interrupting you. Half of the interruptions were self-caused. So actually caused by the person who was, without really any need, kind of switching their task, right? So it's basically the situation when you sit there and you do something, and then you suddenly Alt-Tab into another window and do something else. And then you realize, oh, what did I just do? And, yeah. So that's kind of the situation. And of course, that is something you can kind of counter with training concentration. We can't really do anything with concentration around, for the kind of the outside interruptions that we get, but concentration actually helps us to minimize these self-caused interruptions. And that's one of the things that mindfulness promises, that you can train concentration. And just imagine if you could be like even 10% more concentrated. That would even be huge. So, that's concentration. Let's look at clarity. Clarity is basically the capacity to be clear on what is exactly going on in me, right? It's usually interesting if we look inside. Another example is if you, let's say you're in a meeting and your colleague is presenting something, and you sit there and listen and you think, that's crap, what he's saying, right? So clarity would mean in that context, well, first actually noticing that you're having that thought, that you're having that judgment, but also having clarity, noticing where does this come from? What are kind of the causes of that? Because that might be a very interesting mix from many things. One might be, it's early in the morning and you didn't have your coffee yet. And then you're always grumpy if you didn't get your coffee before the first meeting. Second thing might be, well, 6 weeks ago you were presenting something and that same colleague, kind of said that's not a good idea what you're saying. And you're kind of still grumpy with him or her. Or you might notice, well, I actually have some, counter arguments that are kind of based on something he or she is saying. Yeah? And quite often it's usually a mix of those things, and it can happen that we don't notice. And in that sense, clarity helps you to make better decisions. Okay, equanimity. So what's equanimity? Again, this time a kind of a real story that I experienced. It's like three and a half years ago, I think. So my main work is as an Agile coach, and I was coaching a team, and actually things were going quite okay, quite well. And then at someday, kind of the product owner came to me, and he said, Markus, I'm actually really frustrated right now. I just come back from a meeting from my boss, with my boss, and he basically told me to kind of finally finish writing all the stories, refining all the stories in the product backlog, estimating them, and he really wants to have a date when all of this is finished. So, and I guess most of you probably know enough about Agile that this is not the idea of how we want to work in that context, for various good reasons. So there was a bit of talking and stuff like that, and we kind of settled things and cleared things up, so everything was fine after a couple of meetings again. And then I kind of reflected, why did that actually happen? Why did that boss, do that? And the usual thought that people often have in this situation is it's something like, well, he's either, he probably doesn't understand Agile, or he's a bit stupid or whatever, or kind of very old-fashioned or something. And all of that wasn't true. That was a really smart person, and he had been to a training about Agile, and I'm pretty sure he got kind of the core of it, and still that happened. So, and my idea about what happened there was that looking at kind of the progress of the project or the product development, and looking at kind of the state of the product backlog, that person really felt uncomfortable. Because when we work in an Agile way, we always have a certain amount of uncertainty around. Yeah, that's the idea. We don't, we don't want to throw out all the uncertainty by making a perfect plan. That then doesn't happen this way anyway. But we allow that a certain amount of uncertainty is actually there, right? So we go, step by step, sprint by sprint. We kind of, come closer to our goal. And in that moment, this kind of uncertainty felt a bit too uncomfortable. I also heard that he probably got some pressure from higher up. So there was probably a situation where he did feel like too much discomfort with this kind of uncertainty that we usually have when we work with Agile. So, and it was too much. And too much means, I need to do something to fix this. And what he did in this case was he fixed it in a way he knew, or he was trained for like 20 years to do. So because that was a traditionally trained project manager, he was very successful in his role back then, and still is. And he kind of fell back on some automatic kind of, this is how we do things, right? This is how he was trained. And without thinking, I would say, he kind of, okay, there's too much of this uncertainty, so I'm going to make sure that there is a plan and that there is a final date, and this is going to happen, and bam. Yeah. And that is actually the definition of equanimity. The definition of equanimity is having the capacity to be with what is, even if it might be a bit uncomfortable, without, falling into some kind of automatic reaction that you don't want. That's exactly the definition. So in that moment, this person was actually lacking enough equanimity for the situation he was in. So to a certain extent, equanimity is about, or can be about, being enough or being somewhat comfortable with, for example, discomfort. And that's an experience I actually have in a lot of organizations. If I'm in an organization where people are somewhat comfortable with being uncomfortable, then that is an organization that is usually very open to change and to try things and to adapt. And that's what we want when we do Agile. And if I'm in an organization where people don't have that comfort with sometimes being discomfortable, sometimes being kind of not 100% sure how things gonna be, then it's actually really hard to do anything related to Agile, anything related to learning, anything related to changing. So that's actually, for me, a connection I quite often make in my work. I quite often say that Agile is, for me, an organizational or team-level answer to complexity. So we live in a complex world, the world is changing, and we need to react to that. We can't make 5-year plans and then expect to be successful with that. So we have to iterate, we have to adapt. And Agile gives us a lot of tools for doing that on a team and organizational level. And mindfulness, for me, is almost it complements it really, really well on a personal level. Because on a team level or organizational level with Agile, for example, we try to really prioritize. We really want to say, this is the one thing we want to do first, or maybe these are the 3 things we want to do first, or these are the 3 things we want to do in this sprint. We're not going to do 25 things in this sprint. It's just these 3. So we do a lot of prioritization in order to not do too much at the same time. And concentration, again, gives you the capacity to actually work on these things and to focus on the things that you choose to do. And the same with adaptation and learning. Lots of practices that are around adapting and learning in Agile. And again, equanimity or mindfulness and equanimity are giving you the internal capacity to actually do this. So that's why I like to combine it. Okay. If you read the text, I said there will be a little bit of practice. This is happening now. So actually what I like to do is a really short, maybe 3-minute guided meditation. And you can, of course, choose to join, or you can choose not to join, and both is totally fine for me. The only thing I'm asking, if you choose to join, do it fully, and if you not choose to join, do something that in a quiet way. You can, whatever, look at your mobile phone or whatever, think about things or whatever. Okay, so if you choose to join, I'd like you to close your eyes, and if that is uncomfortable, just keep it open and just find a spot where you can rest your eyes. And let's actually take 1 or 2 breaths together, deep breath in and out. And breathe in and out. And continue maybe 3 more breaths in your own pace, 3 more deep breaths. Really focusing on the out breath, really relaxing for a moment. And then let your breath flow naturally, not manipulating it. And simply notice the air flowing in and flowing out. Notice the body sensations that are related to the breath. Maybe it's your chest expanding and contracting. Shoulders rising and falling. All kinds of body sensations might be happening. And then allow your attention to expand to your whole body. So no need to just watch your breath, just notice your whole body or specific body sensations. Maybe there's an itch somewhere. Maybe somewhere it's particularly warm or cold. Maybe you notice some kind of fabric on your body from your clothing. And for now, actually, there's nothing else to do than just noticing. No need to analyze that. No need to do something with that. And maybe you notice that for some of you, there is a point, or you notice that actually you're not with your body anymore. Your attention has wandered somewhere else, to the rest of the evening, or to some thoughts, or to that email you still want to write, or whatever. And that's totally normal. It's a very normal function of our mind, of our brain. And if you notice, simply return. Just relax again. Find your breath. Again, start to notice your body. And then at some point your attention wanders again somewhere, and you notice, you return. And that's the core of the exercise. Whenever you notice your attention has wandered somewhere else, you return. This is actually strengthening your concentration muscle. Every time you return, it's like pulling a weight in the gym for that concentration muscle. Okay, and just notice how you are right now. Maybe there's a sense of calm, of peace. Or it's the opposite, a sense of restlessness. Maybe some frustration that this is not working for you. Or it's actually working quite well. Just notice again what's there. And then with the next 1 or 2 breaths, bring your attention outwards again, open your eyes. Okay, thanks a lot. People are still awake, great. I would like to hear one kind of reaction from one person. How was that? What happened? Peaceful? Okay, great. So you had a good time, lovely. Perfect. Okay, great. It's not always the case. That's also okay. Meditation is not about being peaceful. It's actually about practicing your attention, practicing to be concentrated, and also practicing clarity and equanimity in that. Okay. Thank you for that. Thank you for your trust in going along with that. So, second part of this talk. So the talk is, we called the talk Mindfulness for People Like Us. So what do I mean by people like us? So in a certain sense, I hope I have already answered that question a bit, because I gave you some examples about how mindfulness can be helpful in your work environment. And hopefully most of you can relate to the examples and can see how this might be useful for you to develop or to kind of increase your skills of concentration, clarity, and equanimity. But I also want to do this, look at this people like us thing again through different lenses. I want to kind of look at mindfulness through different frames, or you could even say narratives. That's why I also asked you in the beginning, so what comes up when you hear the word mindfulness? So I want to kind of look at a couple of frames that are quite common. And my guess is that you will be able to relate to some of these frames. So maybe not so much the first one, because the first frame, it's more historically, yeah? The first frame that sometimes what comes up when I speak about mindfulness is that I ask, what comes up when you hear the word. Someone says, yeah, that's not for me, I'm not a tree hugger. Something like that. And that kind of reaction makes, in a certain sense, total sense, because when we look at mindfulness in the Western world, the way it came into the Western world is actually through kind of the hippie movement. It came through people who in the 60s went to India, to Myanmar, to Nepal, spent like 1, 2, 3 years there, trained with people, and then came back and shared what they were learning, right? So, and a lot of people are kind of related to this hippie movement. Yeah? So it makes sense that we quite often in the background still have this kind of idea that this is some kind of hippie, esoteric, whatever thing. Yeah? But it's actually way less than it used to be than a couple of years ago. So another thing that's much more common is that people, when they hear mindfulness, they mainly think of, that's something health related, something especially for mental health. Right? And that also makes sense because, like I said in the beginning, when the kind of all the scientific research started into mindfulness, and that's actually, it started maybe 30 years ago, so it's not really a long time, right? Most of the research did look at kind of connections to mental health. And one of the kind of most well-known mindfulness program, like probably some of you know that, MBSR, mindfulness-based stress reduction, like the title says, is about stress reduction. It's about burnout prevention. And there's lots of research going on with some nice results. For example, we know that mindfulness practice is as effective as antidepressants in dealing with mild and medium kind of severity depression. And maybe some of you can connect to that. Maybe some of you do struggle a bit with burnout and do struggle with depression. I can say for myself, so I had like 2 episodes of that, and it definitely helped me. Mindfulness definitely did help me in kind of dealing with this kind of situation. So that's going on with one frame of looking at mindfulness. The other one, which is probably the dominant narrative, the dominant frame to look at mindfulness right now, is kind of the productivity and self-improvement lens, right? So there are lots of companies out there who run big institutional mindfulness programs. It's Google, SAP, LinkedIn, Probably some of you are in companies who have mindfulness programs that you can go and book. And of course, these companies are doing that because they want you to be well and to be happy, and it also pays off. Yeah, so there's a kind of impact on productivity there, and of course, that's also why they do it, right? So there's tons of blogs, influencers, the best 5 mindfulness tips for heavy living, blah, 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 all these kinds of things. So that's very, very dominant right now. Yeah? And again, maybe that already speaks to you. Maybe you are one of the people who kind of really are into self-improvement and kind of really like this. And then mindfulness is actually really something interesting to look at. Yeah? I'm also somewhat part of the group. I'm a certified Search Inside Yourself teacher. Search Inside Yourself is a mindfulness program that has been developed within Google and was then kind of outsourced to the rest of the world. So other companies are doing that too now. And so that's and I make some of my money with doing mindfulness programs in companies. And it's kind of, I find that okay. It brings some useful things to the company, and also a lot of useful things, hopefully, to the people attending. There, I would say there is another kind of lens to look at mindfulness, and I kind of think that this is a lens that actually, hopefully, most of you really find interesting, because that's actually my main interest and my main driver in looking at mindfulness. And that's that there is a much smaller and not really visible community of people who are, I would say, hackers, scientists, teachers, who kind of look at mindfulness and try to kind of get back to what it was originally about and improving that. So, and what mindfulness was originally about is it was not about mental health. Yeah. So, for example, the Buddha didn't invent mindfulness because there was a mental health problem. And he also didn't do that because there was a productivity problem. Yeah? It was a way to gain insight, and to gain insight into something that makes the core of our experience, and that's our mind, our attention, how our perception works. And it was a framework, and still is a framework, it's a system to explore how our mind works. And that, for me, is very much what I would call a hacker mindset. I wouldn't call myself a full-blown hacker, but I'm definitely a person who's kind of really interested in tinkering with systems. It's one of the funs I have with Agile coaching, that I can tinker with organizational systems and explore things with teams. It's a lot of fun. It's what I love, what I love doing. And my guess is that a lot of us are choosing this job because we kind of like that. We kind of like to explore what can we do with systems? What can we kind of maybe even do with it that was not intended, right? So how can I, optimize that? And stuff like that, right? And in that sense, and I found that quote somewhere, I actually lost the source. I'm really sad, but that's a quote I found in some book, and I don't know where. But the quote said, actually, in that sense, the Buddha was the first hacker. And he hacked the most advanced computer that nature had ever created, the human brain. So I think that might be something that speaks to a lot of us. Because when I do mindfulness, kind of what I do is basically I explore how my mind works. And that relates, like I said, to concentration. It relates to what I'm thinking. It relates to my mood. And it basically defines every moment that I experience. So in terms of computers, what we are exploring is basically my operating system, right? If I really understand my operating system, I can do a whole bunch of stuff on this machine. If I really understand my internal operating system, I can do a whole bunch of stuff with what's going on in me. So, plus the additional bonus is a lot of these people also combine this with, for example, technology. So there's really interesting research going on right now in how can I do technology-assisted mindfulness. So for example, on the picture on the lower right, what you see there, this white thing on the head of the guy, that's Shinzen Yang. And the white thing is I have to look it up, it's a transcranial ultrasound device. So the idea is that you use ultrasound to actually in a very detailed and fine-grained way, shut down parts of your brain. And you can do that very safely with ultrasound and very, very precisely. And they're actually, for example, now researching how this is helping meditators on their path, right? And they, this is like research that's still going on, but they made some good progress, some good results so far. So the idea is basically, imagine you're a serious meditator and you're going to a meditation retreat. And these retreats, sometimes they last 3 days, sometimes last 10 days. There are some that last a month or even 3 months. So imagine you're at your 7th day of your meditation retreat and you sit there and you have a really high degree of clarity, of concentration, and of equanimity, and you just experience kind of some insight into how all of this works, and it's kind of slowly changing you. So imagine you could get to that state not with 7 days of training, but with kind of almost minutes of training. So, and that's what they actually are researching right now. So really, technology-assisted mindfulness training. So, and that sounds also it sounds a bit scary, to be honest, but it also sounds quite fascinating. It's also part of why I'm kind of really interested in all of that. Okay, so that was kind of my second thread in this talk, why I think kind of mindfulness might be interesting for you. The first one was about showing you how this relates to work and how it can help in your work. And the other one is kind of showing you the different lenses you could look at when you look at mindfulness. And maybe one of these lenses kind of connects to you. And you say, oh yeah, that's actually something that's kind of interesting for me. So then the question, if that did happen, might not be for everyone, but if that did happen, what can you do now? So, and this is basically just giving you some recommendations about books. There's this book that you already saw on one of the slides, for example, The Mindful Geek. It's a simple, very practical description about how to start meditating and how to start mindfulness meditation. And like I said, in the title, it's written more for geeks. There's a book called The Mind Illuminated. That's like 400 pages, I think. Really detailed, fascinating book, but I think you need some seriousness to actually start doing that, because 400 pages. And if you want to learn more about the science, what we know about the science behind and around mindfulness, there's actually a very nice book that's just 2-3 years old, Altered Traits, that gives you kind of almost an overview where you could then start to explore certain topics deeper. Okay, but like I said, reading books won't get you very far. You have to practice, you have to train. So, and actually, apps are kind of a good start, I would say, mostly. For most people, using one of those mindfulness apps is a good start into a regular practice. I've just written like 2 that are not so well known on the slide. Bright Mind uses a quite specific mindfulness framework that my guess is a lot of people here would like. so it's kind of very structured and it's kind of, brings lots of things in the mindfulness world in relation. So it's a app that it's kind of very based on a deep fundamental understanding of mindfulness and not just nice voices speaking nice guided meditations. And Medito is run by a foundation, so they are based on donations and are and it's free to use, and they are not collecting any data. Because that's actually one of the things that are not so nice about a lot of, especially also the big mindfulness apps, that they make you pay for it, but they also collect your data and use that. And another thing, of course, is to find good training, and I would really recommend that. It's one of the things where I personally waited way too long, that, getting into a really good personal training. And it's actually not, I would say it's not easy to find a good training, because it's basically you don't know what to look out for. It's really hard to kind of pick from descriptions on websites. So just one tip that I would give is check that the training gives you some support in developing meditation as a habit. Because like I said before, if you want to get into that, it actually needs regular training. It's not a thing you do once and then, okay, now I meditated for an hour and that's it. It's like going to the gym, it's like brushing your teeth. You have to make this a part of your life in order for it to actually have the benefits that I was speaking about. So it means it has to become a habit, and I think actually good training is kind of designed for that. And that's also one thing I usually try to do. So if people ask me, can you do a workshop, mindfulness workshop, I always say yes, of course, and can we also do a couple of follow-ups? And so in order to kind of ground what we did in the workshop and develop a habit. Okay, that was it. Thank you for listening, and thank you for practicing with me. I think I'm a minute over time, so people, of course, can leave, as always. And if there are any questions, I'm here for another few minutes. So, any questions?